Hi, Nick Arnett here. The great thing about writing a book is it forces you to boil your ideas down to something pretty simple. I've been teaching about resilience for a few years now, but writing the book allowed me to come up with this fairly simple framework that's going to be the content of this presentation. So the book will be out July of next year from HarperCollins Leadership. It's called Stress into Strength: Resilience Routines for Warriors, Wimps, and Everyone in Between. And that's because all of us are in between there somewhere. I want to change the way we talk about stress. Mostly when we talk about stress, it's with charts like this. How much stress do people feel? So here it is broken down by age and gender. It is kind of encouraging because it says that we feel less stress as we get older. The problem is that's really only half the story, and it makes stress seem like this bad thing that we need to get rid of. That's not correct. You'll find all sorts of different definitions for stress. In fact, the guy who came up with the word in the context of psychology realized that we were using stress to mean both the thing that causes the stress and our reaction to it. Let's make it really simple. Stress is when your heart beats faster. We tend to think of stress as bad, but did you notice not all those things were bad things? That's because lots of things make our heart beat faster, and that is a stress response. It helps us rise to challenges and opportunities, and it helps us to deal with threats. So our stress response isn't positive or negative. It's really just our ability to be flexible in our response to opportunities, challenges, and threats. So the missing half is renewal. We have a whole set of reactions that also I lump together under this word renewal. And when you combine the two together, stress plus renewal, you actually become stronger. But you need both. So you got to have the right kinds and amounts of stress and the right kinds and amounts of renewal. And you have to do those at the right intervals, the right rhythm. But when you put those together, you become more resilient. You become stronger. So what's renewal? Renewal is when your heart beats slower. Renewal, those things that slow down your heartbeat, is a little harder to put into pictures. But I hope you saw that it's about connection, making connections with nature, making connections with people, making connections with values as well. And those connections can't be shallow. They're deep commitments, really commitment to other people, commitment to stewardship of the natural world, commitment to your own physical body as well. And it's all about experiences. It's not about what you know so much as the experiences you have that reassure the illogical part of your brain that a community has your back, or that you have the skills you need to be able to do things to stay healthy and earn a living, have shelter over your head, and so forth. So if you experience stress, but you don't get renewal, that's when stress becomes this bad thing, because you're facing opportunities, challenges, and threats, and your heart rate goes up. And if you don't get renewal, your heart rate stays high because our physical and mental stress reactions are sticky. And then you get the stress hormones and the physiological changes that wear you down over time. So resilience routines, which is my name for this combination of stress and renewal at the right intervals and so forth, is about choosing to have opportunities, challenges, and threats that will raise your heart rate, and choosing to make connections, commitments, and have experiences that will slow your heart rate. And again, doing that at the right intervals, the right rhythm, the right amounts, the right kinds. So yes, it's about choosing stress, and it's about choosing renewal in the right intervals and so forth. And then some stress you don't get to choose. I mean, life hands us stress, right? So you need to activate renewal in response to stress or even trauma, which actually injures you, that you may not have chosen. So, for example, and this should be really familiar to you if you go to the gym, if you understand anything about how your muscles grow. Physical strength and resilience come from these two stress reactions you've probably heard of. These were coined more than 100 years ago. Fight or flight, and rest and digest. So fight or flight, that's a stress response. Rest and digest is the renewal response. And when you combine them, that gives you strength for doing things. So you go to the gym, you work out, you get a stress response. If you get out of your comfort zone at all, you're going to have that stress response. And then you rest between sets. And then after you do some sets, you go home, you sleep, you rest, you eat your protein and so forth, and your muscles actually grow and you become stronger. This is where we're really different from machines. Like your car, you can exercise your car all you want, and you can give your car all the rest in the world, but it's never going to raise its horsepower at all. But living things are different. We become stronger, we adapt, and so forth. So if you were to talk to a coach or a trainer to say, how do I go about building up my physical strength and my physical flexibility? Because a lot of what this is about is also flexibility. First thing is establish safety. So everything I'm going to talk about here, first thing to do is do it safely, whether it's connecting with people, whether it's getting out into nature, whether it's your values and beliefs and so forth. Safety comes first. You do need to get out of your comfort zone. That's where the stress comes in. If you want to grow your muscles, you got to lift a bit more than you're comfortable lifting, but only a bit. I'm not telling you have to get way out of your comfort zone. In fact, don't get way out of your comfort zone because that's likely to lead you to just give up, and you may injure yourself as well. So you want to pay attention to your technique, pay attention to your own reactions. Noticing what's going on inside you is a big part of accomplishing this. And pay attention to your long-term progress as opposed to short-term. Having a long-term perspective is a renewal response. When we get into this stress mindset, when the stress autopilot part of our brain that isn't logical takes over, we become very short-term focused and we get tunnel vision. We lose sight of the big picture. So keeping journals and things, or just keeping a record, an Excel spreadsheet, if it's weightlifting, how many pounds did you do on each machine each day, so that you can stand back and look at the bigger picture. You got to have the right intervals, right? You got to rest for the right amount of time between sets and between workouts. And in between, to activate renewal, you got to get good sleep, you got to rest, you got to get protein and a healthy diet and so forth. And to stay motivated, you also need to remember why you're doing this and the good it does for you. Otherwise, it can be very easy to lose sight of the whole purpose for it. And really important, nobody sticks with anything 100%. When you don't keep to your schedule, just start over. Give yourself unlimited permission to fail and start again, because if you don't do that, what happens is guilt, or even worse, shame starts creeping in. And then you lose your motivation and your self-discipline and so forth. Those are enemies of your ability to stick with it. So give yourself 100% complete permission to fail and just start over. Remember that. Just start small and start over. So the physical effects of stress, I'm not going to go into in great detail, but you've probably heard of adrenaline and cortisol. Those are the two big stress hormones that are blamed for all sorts of bad things. What they do for you that's good is they give you short-term energy, they give you focus, They help you remember things better. That's why some coffee will help you when you're studying for a test. Cortisol is a long-term energy releaser. So adrenaline gives you that immediate boost, and then cortisol releases more energy for you, to give you endurance and so forth. And when you lift weights, you actually injure your muscles. You get these micro tears. If you're trying to grow your muscles, you actually want to injure your muscles in these with these micro tears. So that's stress, and that's pretty well understood. But renewal, we've only really begun to understand it from a scientific standpoint in the last decade or so. Oxytocin, this hormone that we thought was mainly about women giving birth, turns out to have an amazing role in actually healing and repairing the damage that stress does, particularly to your heart muscle. So adrenaline will injure and damage your heart muscle when it's too high. Your heart will become irritable and so forth. Oxytocin, when it gets released, actually heals and repairs that damage. And then you have a whole set of, just like you have a set of stress hormones, you have a set of renewal hormones that your body releases when you have these renewing experiences of rest and connection and commitment and so forth. And those are androgens, human growth hormone, DHEA and so forth, and they help you repair and grow. And that's not, by the way, that's not just physical, it's also mental. So oxytocin actually drives us to repair social connections. So the mental effects of stress are to get that short-term focus, tunnel vision, irritability. We kind of distance ourselves from other people. We're slow to trust and so forth. Become very rigid in our thinking under stress and very binary. It's either this or that. There's no gray area in between. And we tend to be on alert for possibilities. Now, let me talk again about why stress is good. If you're a police officer, if you're a firefighter, if you're a paramedic, if you do any kind of high-risk job, or even if you're, let's say, a venture capitalist, it's really helpful to you for your survival, not so much if you're a venture capitalist, but for to think about the possibilities and be prepared for them. The reason it's good for a venture capitalist is they get paid to imagine possibilities or put money into possibilities that other people didn't see, so they can be the first ones out there with it. So this possibility thinking is part of the stress response, and that's why it's good. We tend to become very, very realistic, almost too realistic when we're under stress. And flash memory is very good under stress. So if you were alive and over the age of 4 or 5 years old on 9/11, 2001, you can remember exactly where you were when you heard about the terrorist attacks of 9/11, and that's flash memory. It really sticks with you. It's a different kind of memory from long-term learning, which more comes from renewal. So here are the renewal mental effects. You get that perspective back. You lose the tunnel vision. You start to see long-term strategies in the bigger picture. You become a lot more flexible. You're not so rigid, much more accepting of things. You can be more creative. There certainly can be creative in some of the possibility thinking, but we tend to put things together in new ways during the downtime, the renewal time. And we tend to think more about what's probably going to happen instead of what those possibilities of what might happen. So as an example, the stress response to getting on an airplane is, oh my goodness, this thing might crash. The renewal response to getting on an airplane is they hardly ever crash. Right? And so if you get too much stuck in the stress response, you can be very reluctant to set foot on an airplane or do anything else that has that possibility of injury or death. And then when we're in the renewal mode, we tend to be very optimistic. We get our hope back, and we're able to do that deeper kind of learning, not just the flash memory of details, but to really learn things, and that comes during sleep and other renewal activities. So none of this is to say that stress can't hurt you. So stress can hurt you. That's trauma, right? And it's just like in weightlifting, although it applies to us mentally as well and even spiritually. So in the weight room, you can lift too much weight, and that'll hurt you. You can lift too often. You don't rest enough between sets. When you're not at the gym, if you're not getting enough rest and nutrition, all that lifting can end up hurting you. And this is kind of codependence, lifting other people's weights for them. That doesn't help because now they're not getting the stress they need, and you're getting too much stress and you're not taking care of yourself. So the kinds of things that cause stress, stressors, are in the physical realm. That's sickness, injuries, being too hot, too cold, tired, dehydrated, hungry, bankrupt, homeless, unequipped. And it's not just having these things happen. It's even the threat that this might happen to you or to someone you care about, like your children, for example. Of course, you're going to feel some stress if any of these things are a threat to your children, other members of your family, your friends, and interestingly, even people who just resemble you, who you may not have any connection to, but they do the same job, or they look like you. They're, if you're a firefighter and you hear about another firefighter dying in the line of duty, even if you don't know that person, you're going to feel some stress about it. That's what psychologists call identification. And then we have social stressors, and that's when we start feeling isolated, unappreciated, lonely, embarrassed, or the big ones, guilt and shame, or abandonment and betrayal, and so forth. Those are big social stressors. We are wired to avoid those things and feel stress when they either are happening to us, threaten to happen to us, or somebody we are connected to. That's affiliation in psychological speak, or somebody we are similar to, identification again. And then there are spiritual stressors. And when I talk about spiritual, I don't necessarily mean religion. Religion can be a source of this, but spirituality in this context is really about having values and beliefs and so forth beyond just taking care of me and, making power and money and that sort of thing. So the spiritual stressors are when life feels meaningless or aimless. Betrayal is sort of social and spiritual. When things really feel out of control and you feel very helpless and unpredictability. Our stress autopilot loves predictability, and it activates when things feel unpredictable. All right, let's dive into this a little deeper. So we have physical stress and renewal, and that has to do with our body and the natural world, the physical world. So the stress reaction, as I mentioned earlier, is fight or flight. So there's our little kitten who is ready to either do battle or run away. The renewal reaction, as I mentioned earlier, is rest and digest. So here's some military folks who are sharing a meal together. Meal sharing is a really powerful way to activate renewal. And then social stress and renewal is about your thoughts and feelings. So the stress reaction is to defend and distance. If you find yourself wanting to explain and defend why you're doing what you're doing, you're probably having a social stress response. Or if you just want to get away from somebody, that might also be a stress response. The renewal reaction, the social renewal reaction, is to tend and befriend, to care for others. Caring actually creates resilience because it is this renewal activator. And it's tending and befriending people or even animals or really even your garden, although that kind of goes back to that physical stress and renewal. And then spiritual, it's about priorities and purpose. Psychologists have known for a long time that people with a strong sense of purpose in their lives are healthier and better off and have a greater, more positive sense of well-being than those who don't. The stress reaction, the spiritual stress reaction, is to become more selfish and survivalist. And that's good for us when we need to. So there's some prepper's pantry getting ready for the apocalypse or something. You can get carried away on any of these things. But for instance, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit and we needed to shelter in place, being more selfish and survivalist was the right thing to do. Some people certainly got carried away. So the renewal reaction, the spiritual renewal reaction, is to stop, to pause and plan. And again, as I said before, it's to get the big picture back, to regain your perspective. So here's a little chart putting it all together. So the physical stress response is fight or flight, the renewal response, rest and digest, and that gives us strength for doing and owning and using things, about things. The social stress response is to become defensive, to distance yourself from other people, and the renewal response is to tend and befriend them. And then that gives us strength for thinking and feeling. And then the spiritual stress response is to become more selfish and survivalist. The renewal response is to take a breath, pause, plan, and that gives us greater strength of purpose and priorities. So how do you build resilience? Well, to a certain extent, I said it was about experiences rather than reading books and so forth, because you kind of need to be an animal trainer of yourself. You're training your stress autopilot. This is part of our brain that isn't particularly rational, and it learns only from experiences. It's pretty hard to convince of anything through logic. It wants safety, it wants companionship, and it wants predictability. So that's rest and digest, tend and befriend, pause and plan. But really important, and I kind of mentioned this before, but I want to really emphasize it. Remember I said guilt and shame will erode your motivation, your self-discipline, your willpower, your impulse control. So people who are resilient have more motivation. They have greater self-discipline, but those are the results of practicing resilience routines. It cannot be the way that you get there. So don't confuse the reward at the end of this journey with the journey itself. So again, really important. Instead of relying on self-discipline and so forth, you start small, you start over, you give yourself unlimited permission to fail and begin again. So don't should on yourself. With COVID-19, we've been told we shouldn't touch our faces. But instead of phrasing it that way, this is a little reframing exercise, is what psychologists call it. We're going to reframe it as, by not touching my face, I'm reducing the chance of infection. So notice that's a positive thing rather than the negative of I shouldn't touch my face. And then there's staying home, sheltering in place. Instead of I should stay home, staying home helps keep our family healthy. Again, a positive instead of the shaming, guilt-inducing negatives of should. So here are some of the ways that you can activate physical stress and renewal. One is controlled breathing exercises, and there are lots of them. Go online, search Google with just those words, controlled breathing exercises, and you'll find lots of them. But also anytime we get physical exercise and we develop muscle memory, we practice doing things, that can be both stressful and renewing. And it's interesting that some of the same things that cause us stress, like lifting weights and so forth, when we choose to do them, when we know there's an end, then they also will trigger renewal because it all feels like it's under control. So possessions are part of your physical stress and renewal as well. So Marie Kondo has the show about managing your stuff, and she makes a good, I've actually never seen the show, but I know that what she teaches is about not having too many things. So you don't want to have too few. We need shelter, we need food, we need physical objects, we need tools to earn a living, to take care of ourselves. But having too many can be as stressful as having too few. And then nourishment. Diet is extremely important. Every day we learn more and more about why what we eat affects what they call the second brain, which is in our gut. And so I could give you lots of guidance about eating like whole grains and so forth, but the simple way that I found that really works is to just search on or get a book about eating an anti-inflammatory diet. If you eat an anti-inflammatory diet, that is going to help with stress and renewal, guaranteed. And then connecting with nature. There are more and more studies showing that there is something about nature, whether it's that it is the environment we evolved in, or that maybe it's just because it requires no maintenance. You get out into the wilderness and you don't have to vacuum, you don't have to clean, you have to do anything. You can just be in it. So somehow nature activates renewal. People who spend a bit of time in nature regularly are experience less stress, more renewal, they're healthier and so forth. And then finally, sleep. Sleep, boy, we're finding out sleep is so incredibly important, and most people are not getting enough sleep. For each of these topics, physical, social, and spiritual, I'm going to recommend one book. And one I'm going to recommend for physical, if you can read one book or listen to it on tape or find on YouTube or wherever else Matthew Walker talking about sleep. It's just a fantastic eye-opening book. After I read this, I started thinking that if everybody in the United States would just get another hour or two of sleep, a ton of our problems, both behavioral and physical, would just go away. So, great book. And then another way, we have some physical shortcuts to renewal. Remember I said that noticing what's going on within you is important? Well, that's what interoception is in the physical sense. It's noticing what your body is doing. So things like progressive muscle relaxation, you can find that online, or yoga, or Pilates, Tai Chi, martial arts, all those disciplines which are really mind-body disciplines, they help you notice what's going on with your body, and they can directly activate the part of your nervous system that activates renewal. They're powerful stuff. So then, second, mental and emotional resilience. This is the social part of it. The stress reaction was to defend or distance, and the renewal reaction was to tend and befriend. And that gives us strength, greater strength for thinking and feeling. So this does mean choosing social stress, which might sound strange to people, but what it means is to risk being transparent and vulnerable with safe people. Don't rush into this, but we all need people we can just be real with. One of the scarier statistics I learned as I was writing this book is that an incredible number of people in the United States have no close friends, especially men. A huge percentage of men report that they have zero close friends. That is not good for us. We need people we can just get real with and who get real with us. People who accept us exactly as we are without trying to fix us, without trying to make us feel better, without feeling sorry for us or pity or any of those things. So the idea is we all need trusted friends that we allow to see who we really are. But again, no rush, build trust, because if you rush into it, you're risking betrayal for one thing. You got to know if these people are trustworthy. The other thing is if you like join a group of some sort, or you make a friend and you start spilling your guts, and then you go away and you realize you don't know that person that well. That might be the end of that relationship because you feel like that was just too much of a risk. Remember, I said get out of your comfort zone a little. Don't go too far. And as I mentioned before, it's not just people, but animals are really powerful too. So dogs and horses in particular. The parrot's there because that's our parrot. I said caring creates resilience, so caring for the parrot probably creates some resilience for us. But dogs and horses are amazing. So they're kind of different from one another. Dogs, if a dog is friendly, and these are crisis intervention dogs that I worked with CAL FIRE's Employee Support Services team. Actually, that's the one on the upper left is a crisis response dog. The one on the upper right, those are therapy dogs that we had come into fire camp. Dogs read your emotions and respond to them, and if they sense that you're upset, they will come to you and just be there. I went to Las Vegas in a follow-up to that horrendous shooting where more than 500 people were shot. Really extremely high stress event for Las Vegas firefighters, of course. And I talked to some of the firefighters about the crisis intervention dogs who were there immediately afterwards and who we had brought back to visit with them. And they said, dogs just accept you as you are. They can always tell if you've had a bad day. And one of the things that I hadn't quite thought about that somebody pointed out, which is dogs don't start crying when you tell them your sad story. Dogs will just be there for you. Now, horses are a little different. Horses are prey animals, where dogs are primarily predator animals. Horses, and you can tell this by where their eyes are, that one? So the dog's eyes point forward, that's predator. The horse's eyes are on the sides, looking in all directions as much as they can. So they're prey animals. The interesting thing about them is that if they sense that you're upset, they won't come to you. The opposite of what the dog does. But that's really good feedback, because that can help you learn to kind of center yourself and calm down. And then once you're calm, the horse will come to you. So both of them are great feedback and support animals. And there's much more to it than that, of course. So here's the one book I'd recommend for social stress and renewal. Brene Brown, The Gifts of Imperfection. Anything by Brene Brown or any of her YouTube videos. She's just got great inspiration, great writer. I recommend all of it. So third category, spiritual stress and resilience. So remember, the stress response was to become more selfish and survivalist. The renewal response is to stop, pause, and plan, and that helps build our strength for priorities and purpose. So this is about values. So the idea is to learn, so that means maybe some studying or being mentored and so forth, about values, what's really important. Again, aside from just getting more money, getting more power and so forth. Sort of remember it's a big universe and it's a lot bigger than those self-serving goals and so forth. It's knowing why you do what you do beyond, again, just profiting. And cultivating a sense of wonder and awe. If you remember some of the renewal pictures I showed were about the solar eclipse and looking up at the Milky Way and so forth, and sort of kind of about our place in the universe. And contemplative practices can really help get that perspective back. Mindfulness is a hot buzzword right now. It's not the end all and be all, but it's good. It's absolutely good. Doing all of these things I've talked about mindfully would mean that you're being in the present rather than, if you look at the last bullet there, rather than letting the stress autopilot run the show where it's always either in the past or the future, right? So you're coming into the present, getting your perspective back. And when you do that, you automatically let go of anxiety from what happened to you in the past and worry about what might happen in the future, which are your stress autopilot. But even that is a good thing. Remember, stress always serves a good purpose. That's your stress autopilot saying, hey, I want you to learn from this. I'm going to replay it so that you learn from it, and I'm going to rehearse in case something like that happens again. That can be annoying. You don't want to be doing that all the time, and renewal will help you get out of that and can even really help you learn from those experiences and settle down that stress autopilot. Here's the book that I'll recommend here, Forgive for Good by Fred Luskin. This book has some great stuff in it that isn't completely about forgiveness. And he also has videos on YouTube and so forth. And he talks about this idea of unenforceable rules, which very powerful for me. The idea that we sometimes develop, or I think we inevitably, all of us will develop these things called unenforceable rules. They're shoulds, right? I think this either should happen and then it doesn't, or I think it shouldn't happen and then it does. And Luskin talks a lot about identifying those and letting go of them, and that can help us to forgive ourselves and other people. It's powerful stuff. I'll just leave it at that. So, The Tale of Two Wolves. I use this all the time. If you've ever been to any of my classes and so forth, I pretty much use this story every time. And here's how it goes. An old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside me, he says to the boy. It's a terrible fight, and it's between two wolves. One is bad. He is anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. But then he goes on to say the other wolf is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. And the same fight is going on inside of you and inside of every other person too. So the grandson thinks about that for a minute and asks his grandfather, which wolf will win? And the old Cherokee replies, the one you feed. That story really works at a lot of levels. And one of those levels is that it describes our autonomic nervous system. That's the part of our nervous system that just runs automatically, whether we're awake or asleep and so forth, keeps us breathing and keeps our heart beating and so forth. And it has two parts. So the bad wolf, which I don't really like calling him the bad wolf because he serves a good purpose, as I've talked about all those times that stress is your friend, your ally. We call that the sympathetic nervous system. That's fight or flight, defend or distance, selfish and survivalist. That's when your heart beats faster. And then the good wolf, that's your parasympathetic nervous system, the other half of the autonomic nervous system, and that's the one that activates for rest and digest, tend and befriend, and pause and plan. The big mistake we make, and there's Homer, who's plopped on the couch watching TV, thinking that he is de-stressing, right? Our big mistake is we think we can just starve the bad wolf. If I just get away from the source of stress, turn on the TV or do something else that gets me away from the stress, I'll starve the bad wolf. Well, you don't have to feed your bad wolf, and you can't starve it because bad wolves take whatever they want. You cannot starve your bad wolf. You have to feed your good wolf. So here's a little challenge for you that'll feed your good wolf. All those renewal things feed your good wolf, but these are pretty powerful. Somebody challenged me to do these a while ago, and they really had a pretty amazing effect. Practicing gratitude and generosity. So that'll build optimism. That'll help you think more positively. and it gets your brain out of its negative default mode. We by default, our brains tend to dwell on the negative. We react much more to negative things. If we hear something negative, we're much more likely to believe it, whether it's true or not. We're much more likely to repeat it to other people, and we are more creative in our vocabulary and so forth when we repeat negative stuff. This explains a lot of what goes on in social media. So here are the challenges. For 30 days, and it doesn't have to be in a row. Remember, unlimited permission to fail and start over, but for 30 days, write down 3 things you're grateful for. Write down 3 things you're looking forward to. And also do some anonymous act of kindness. And the key there is anonymous. Nobody's allowed to know about it except you. These could be little things or big things. Somebody lets you merge in front of them in traffic, or you let somebody else merge in front of you. That could be your act of kindness. Pick up a little trash off your neighbor's lawn. Or they could be great big things. If you can afford to fund somebody's college scholarship anonymously, great. Go for it. But again, get out of your comfort zone. You only have to get out of it a little bit. I suppose if you can fund somebody's college scholarship and only be a bit out of your comfort zone, I might feel a little jealous, but that's you. But remember, really important, start small, start over, and be gentle with yourself. That is a line I've stolen from Janet Childs, the head of our Bay Area Critical Incident Stress Management team. She says it all the time. If you leave her a voicemail message, you'll even hear it on her outgoing voicemail. Be gentle with yourself, and can't emphasize it enough. Be gentle with yourself. We tend to be much harder on ourselves than we are with other people. So when I meet somebody who's being really hard on themselves, especially over something where they did their best, and basically we're always doing the best we can with what we have, I'll invite them. How would you, if your best friend was going through what you're going through right now, what would you tell them? And almost always the answer is, you were doing your best with what you had at the time, and that helps people become more gentle with themselves. So be gentle with yourself. So here's what resilience looks like and feels like: realistic optimism. And those may sound like somewhat opposite ideas, and they are. Remember, I said that our brains on stress tend to be very realistic, maybe too realistic, and our brains during renewal tend to be very optimistic. And we can be too optimistic, right? The trick, and there's lots of different ways people say this, but a very common description of people who are resilient is that they are realistic optimists or optimistic realists. So I want to talk about optimism and realism as axes that communities go back and forth between when disaster strikes. So before there's a disaster, communities tend to have a balance of optimism and realism. They're realistic in that they're wedded to reality as it really is, but they're also optimistic. They don't lose. There's no reason to not be hopeful about the future and so forth. And then there's a warning or something, the tornado warning, the hurricane warning. We even have earthquake warnings sometimes here in California, but it's this warning that something is threatening. So maybe in early 2020, the reports out of China about COVID-19, it's like, that sounds like it might be bad. And then when that thing hits, whatever it is, optimism goes away. All we can see is the reality of this disaster that's unfolding. And so we become very, very realistic and not very optimistic at all. But then the first responders show up, the police, the firefighters, the doctors, the epidemiologists, and so forth, and they're painting a picture, and it just seems like they got a handle on it. They're going to rescue us, and we return to optimism. It's like things are going to be good again. And then there's this thing called the honeymoon phase. That's where it feels like the whole community is coming together to rebuild. And we're going to overcome this together, and it's incredibly optimistic. It's actually both of these are kind of too optimistic. They're not that realistic. And we were there for a little while with the pandemic. It seemed like, remember they were saying, 2 weeks of shutdown and things will be good. That was optimistic, huh? So the honeymoon phase, it feels like everything's going to be fine soon. But then reality sets in. And we call this the disillusionment phase. We realize it's not going to get better very fast. It takes a lot longer to recover from disasters, especially pandemics, than you think at first. And now people get very realistic and the optimism goes away and it just seems like this thing's never going to be behind us. But eventually there is reconstruction. And that's when we get to the point, and we're not there yet with the pandemic, where the new normal just becomes normal, right? So life after the disaster isn't the same, but one day we wake up and there's this new normal, but it's just normal. It's not the same as before the disaster, but it's okay and it's good. And we get back to that balance of optimism and realism. So that's how communities tend to move through these things. And it's fairly predictable with communities, but we also do this somewhat individually as well. We become really all too realistic and lose hope for a while, and then too hopeful, and then reality sets in and the optimism goes away, and eventually get back to that balance. And the goal of doing resilience routines and so forth and becoming stronger and more flexible with resiliency is to get that balance back of optimism and realism. So remember, feed your good wolf. I hope you won't mind if I close by plugging the books I have out right now. On the left, Resilience During the Pandemic. That is getting just fabulous reviews on Amazon. I think it has 11 reviews right now. All of them are 5 stars. People have really given it just great, great feedback. So that's available Kindle, paperback, and large print, and you can order any of those 3 on Amazon. The one on the right, Stress Management and Crisis Response, that's a pocket guide. That's for people who've had training as a chaplain or in critical incident stress management or psychological first aid and so forth. It's to help you remember how to do all these different interventions and so forth. And that is available on Kindle, although that's not my preferred way for you to use it because I'd rather you don't pull out an electronic device when you're working with people. But the little spiral bound book is a much better way to just, I use it myself all the time because some of these interventions I don't do very often, and that helps me stay on my toes and do things right, remember what I'm doing. So thanks for listening. Grateful for any books that you might buy. Feel free to get in touch with me with any kind of feedback, questions, or if you're looking for additional information or training.